And then Addison, he is our mortgage lender partner. So we always want to give him the spotlight and give us just updates on the mortgage industry, what's good, what's bad. Like, I know the rates are kind of they've gone up a little bit and they dropped the last couple of days a little bit. So I guess they're holding steady somewhat. But what's the word on the street there, Addison? You're muted. You are muted. Addison, you're muted. I don't, is he talking or no?
I can't tell. It's his first day using Zoom. I'll make fun of him
There we go.
for it here
So,
shortly.
so the
There we go.
biggest thing that I've been watching the past couple of days, obviously everyone's laser focused on the rates. Everyone's very dead set that I shouldn't say everyone. Most people right now are dead set. There's going to be a lot of rate cuts this year. Some inflation data came out earlier this week that wasn't so great. I wouldn't say it was the worst, but it wasn't necessarily great data. And rates did go up quite a bit. I mean, if you look at the 10-year T-bill, do a seven day look back, there is a straight line up quite a bit on the morning that data came out. Definitely did see it correlate over to interest rates. People I was quoting maybe at like a 6.625 are looking more like a 6.75, 6.875 now for the same cost on rate. So it wasn't like a dramatic jump, but it did go the opposite way people were expecting it to start going. So definitely something to keep your eyes on. Let borrowers know, just because they see all this stuff on social media saying rates are going down, rates are in the high fives. That's not necessarily true, just from the past couple of days, because things have gone back up. Mortgage applications are starting to climb up a little bit. So it looks like we could potentially have a strong next month ahead of us. And hopefully, since the Super Bowl is passed, as everyone knows, people will start listing their properties again. And hopefully it drums up some more business for buyers and sellers.
Cool. Good stuff. And then just remind everybody, you do business pretty much in all 50 states, correct?
Yeah, everywhere besides New York.
Okay. Sorry, New Yorkers, if anyone is there from New York.
Mortgages are a little crazy in New York.
Got it. Awesome. And then put your contact info in the chat, Addison.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Thank you, sir. And all right, let's roll in. Mr. Eric, take us away to our topic today.
Awesome. All right. So today's topic is something that recently happened, which tends to be how we pick these topics. So it just kind of depends. But today's topic is actually talking about working with wholesalers and vetting them out, and also how to be cautious with them. So this is something that I learned pretty early on in my business. When I first started my networking days back, trying to work with investors, what I ended up finding out was everybody in the business is doing something, and wholesaling, especially in the past couple of years, has been one of those things that's really picked up steam. So a lot of people have gotten into the wholesaling business, and the biggest reason that people have got into that is because it's less money down for most people, and then also it's easier. There's a lot of gurus out there that talk about. We had somebody ask. Addison works with NRL, National Reliable Lending. Sorry to, but so a lot of gurus have come out. That's my ADHD. I saw the chat. A lot of gurus have come out recently and started talking about how easy wholesaling is, and you can do it from your room, and you don't ever have to leave the house. And we have a lot of people that have jumped into it. So we kind of decided, me and Randy were coming up with a topic, and I was discussing a couple things that we'll talk about at the very end of this that have recently happened, and some stories I have in the past of working with wholesalers, vetting them out, and then making sure that working with wholesalers, you're making sure that they're good at what they do, because sometimes that reputation is shared. And we'll talk about that as well. So what is wholesaling? We've talked about it a little bit before. Being a deal finder and then finding an end buyer is mainly going to be the way I describe wholesaling. You're basically finding a deal and marketing it. So how you find the deal could be direct to seller, on the market, could be through realtors. There's a million different ways to find the deal. and then you're wanting to actually find the end buyer for it. And some of our previous trainings, we've actually talked about the multiple ways there are to wholesale. So there is like actually closing on it. There's assignments. There's double closes. There's a million different ways to do that as well.
I would say
Um,
if you, you know, for the sake of time, we're not going to get into what the details of wholesaling is today. Watch our previous training we did, which was actually wholesaling versus rehabbing was the specific title. And that's on our YouTube channel as well. But go ahead, keep going. Sorry.
Yep. No, and you're good. So in most states, anyone can be a wholesaler. That's one, without being a licensed agent. There are a couple of states. I think Oklahoma is one of them that you're required to be an agent. I want to say Illinois is moving that way. Yep.
Illinois is requires as well. Illinois as a state.
Kentucky, I believe, is trying to pass it, and I think Ohio is too. I think in the future, this is another kind of spiel, but I think in the future, everybody that practices wholesaling is going to have to be a licensed agent. There's always some ways around that. But that's one of the reasons we see it so often. There's not really anything that is kind of barring anybody from saying, I've got a deal, I'm going to go sell it. Tons of gurus coming into the space recently. This is probably one of the things that I see the most on every investor group. Everybody is talking about how easy it is to wholesale, how much money you can make, how quickly you can do it. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about it in here, but wholesaling is a lot of work. And the wholesalers that are really good, they are just like any agent or anything like that. Their systems are dialed in. They know their numbers, their metrics, their KPIs. They've got CRMs that they use. They've got buy boxes. They are on top of it. And then you've got the other spectrum where you just have, you know, anybody can jump in. So I say that to say, as in every profession, and we'll kind of talk about this too, there's good wholesalers and there's bad wholesalers. And our goal, working with wholesalers, is a great way to get deals. Our goal is to find who's the good wholesalers, work with them, and then weed out the bad ones. So, and then wholesaling the right way. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to add, because I do speak across the country, and in front of investors or newer investors, especially. And one of the things we always tell them, like, look, we know wholesaling is sexy and it's the easiest way to making that buck, especially if you have no money. However, in order to become a good professional wholesaler, you need to know how to analyze deals as if you were going to rehab it, right?
Yep.
So you have to understand how to do market research. You got to understand how to come up with ARVs. You have to understand how to get an estimate repair number, right? You have to understand how to analyze the financials, right? How to plug it into something. We have a deal analyzer, we call it, which I think we're going to actually do a training on that maybe in a month. But you have to be able to plug in numbers into something so you understand, what are you even offering? Is this even making any sense number-wise, right? And I think that's where a lot of the wholesalers get a bad rap, is the ones that are not educated. They don't have any coach. They don't have trainers, right? They lock up stupid deals that make absolutely no sense, and they think that someone is going to buy it, but in return, they are the ones that look like, the idiots, right? And they get a bad name for themselves. So you just got to understand that just because you want to wholesale, right, or others are wholesaling, it's education is key, right? And you can quickly tell who's been through an education and who hasn't. And we'll go into that in a moment.
And I think, sorry, I'm trying to fix my camera. It's all messed up on me. I think the other thing too is everybody that I've talked to that wants to get into wholesaling is because they're like, flipping requires capital and buy and hold requires capital. And what I've noticed from a lot of people that I've talked to about wholesaling is they're like, well, it's no capital involved. This is amazing. Like, it's real estate for free. And it's like, the wholesalers I know that are really good are spending 50, 60, 70, 80 grand a month on pay-per-click, mailers, marketing, bandit signs, salespeople, dispo, like the actual ones that are doing a lot of deals. They have essentially, a wholesaler is just a really good marketer, and they're really good at getting those deals locked up. That's all it is. So I always find it kind of funny when I talk to somebody who wants to get into wholesaling, and it's like, oh, it's easy to get into, it's free. And it's like, there's always something. So you're going to be putting in a ton of work if it's free, and driving for dollars or calling just random, lists and hoping and praying that you're going to get deals. the wholesalers that usually have the system set up, they're receiving inbound leads, not outbound. So,
Yeah.
and I always try to do that. But so in wholesaling, if it's done the right way, like a lot of the wholesalers I know that do it the right way, they make really good money and they're worth their weight in gold. I've never really, if a wholesale deal makes sense, there's no need to try and beat up the price or try and get it for the best deal you can. We've always found, hey, you found the deal. I don't care how much you're getting paid. If it's a good deal, you can make 10 times more than what the flipper's going to make. Congrats. You're the one that negotiated it correctly on the front end. So
my first flip, Eric, actually in New Jersey, this is the first flip I ever done getting into real estate. Actually came from a wholesaler from Homevestors, the franchise that have like those billboards everywhere. And it was great. The numbers made sense for me, and you know, they were very professional to deal with. Closed on it, rehabbed it, made 36 grand, and never looked back. And then went into real estate full time, you know. And I have to give credit to a wholesaler that got me started, right? So if it's done right, it could be a really good experience. But we're gonna talk about the bad apples, right? And how to vet them. So let's get into the vetting part.
Okay, absolutely. So the first thing I always start off with is you don't have to work with wholesalers that are completely experienced. And I know that sounds counterintuitive and everybody's gonna be like, no, like you have to work with somebody that's experienced. Some of the best wholesale deals that we've purchased and then gone on to flip have been from first-time wholesalers. And part of it is they have no clue what they're doing. So if they have a killer deal, they're like, I don't even know what I'm sitting on. Will you purchase this? And the other part of it is sometimes they just luck into deals and then they don't have really big buyer like dispo list. So you're the only person. Like a lot of times I'll network with all the first-time wholesalers. And I'll be like, if you get something, send it my way. I would love nothing more than to run the numbers for you.
Oh man, you just made me think of a story with my friend Peter, who was a new investor that I got to meet in San Diego, and he also got licensed and ended up actually joining my team in San Diego. And I asked him, "Is like, dude, like, so why aren't you like sending any offers? Like, what's going on? Like, you said you've been trying to get into investing." And he's like, "Oh, I just been afraid. I don't have the money. I don't have the contacts. The common fears, right, that new investors have." And I was like, "Well, what if I told you that if you lock up a deal, I can get everything figured out for you?" "Oh, really?" "Yeah." I was like, "I'll get everything figured out. We'll find a hard money lender. We'll find whatever we'll need. If it's a good deal, I'll help you." Right. And that's all he needed to hear. Right. He literally, no kidding, this is no lie, within the first week, he got a deal locked up with an out of area realtor. So this was property in San Diego, in Escondido. The realtor was from like 3 hours north, who was selling a property for a family trust in Escondido. It was like the perfect one that I talk about. Out of area realtor selling a property, right? He was the first one to call the listing agent and do what I taught him, which is go directly to the listing agent, ask if they would represent you. She was thrilled to represent him and double end this deal. And he's licensed. So he was like, "Look, I'm going to go to the property on my own. Is it vacant? Can I get in?" She's like, "Yeah, go ahead. You're licensed. Go ahead." And then he calls me. He's like, "Randy, I got a deal locked up." I was like, "Show me the numbers." And all he cared is just making a wholesale fee of 5 to 10K. That's it. Because this kid was delivering food.
Nothing to do. Video-wise makes sense.
Hey, you're not muted, Eric. So this kid was delivering food for Instacart to make ends meet, right, throughout the year. And he had no money. He's like, "Look, I just want to make whatever, 5, 10K on this wholesale." And I was like, "Dude," I was like, "we can do something much better here." I was like, "If you're down, what if we partner and we actually close on this property?" And because it was 2 properties on 1 lot, I was like, "What if we close on this property? I'll bring the hard money lender relationship. I'll cover the gap funding." I had money that I brought in as the gap funder with interest. I was like, "Let's close on it. Let's clean it up inside. That's it. And let's list it 7 days later. And let's go and target an investor that wants to buy and hold this property that's comfortable with renovations." So we literally did that. We listed it for $100,000 more, repositioned the marketing towards the right client, sold the thing 30 days later to with a conventional loan type of buyer, exactly what I was looking for. and we made $54,000 total on that. And that's from a wholesaler who wanted, all he wanted was a wholesale. And I convinced him to partner, and we flipped it, and we basically wholesaled it. We call those wholetails because we didn't do any work. We wholetailed it and we sold it to a end user and made 54 grand. So to your point, this is the reason I'm sharing this. Inexperienced, first time locking up a deal, and we turned that wholesale into a wholetail. And if I disregarded him, I wouldn't have made 27 grand. Moving on. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's important because I just think and you can help somebody along, and then it ends up becoming a relationship that they will, like one of our best wholesalers, we worked with him in the beginning, and now he sends us every deal first. So, but on the vetting side, like inexperienced doesn't mean anything. If they know what they're talking about, they're still perfectly good to work with. This is definitely going to sound like the most basic advice I can give. If you meet with somebody like a wholesaler and they feel untrustworthy, or you get a bad feeling, or you're like, I have no clue, or they just run, it's not worth it. Yeah, just sprint. I promise you, it'll never work out. I've never had a bad feeling with somebody where we continue to work and I'm like, oh, this turned out perfect. It's always like, oh, I had a bad feeling, and then something ends up happening. I'm like, oh, what is happening here? So if you get a bad gut feeling, run. It's always good if they have prior experience. It's always a positive if somebody's willing to vouch for them. So some of the people that I've worked with, what I actually do is I will ask who they've worked with in the past. And I'll ask, like, how was working with them? How did their numbers look? And it's okay to ask for references from a wholesaler. It's okay to say, hey, who have you worked with in the local market? Who can vouch for what you've done?
Yeah,
And I try to figure out, like, are their numbers reasonable? Where are they sourcing the deals? I try to get all of that information from their references.
that's good. Very few people do
Yep.
that. Very few
Yeah.
investors.
But you got to think, like, if somebody's hiring, not that you're hiring out a wholesaler, but if somebody's hiring that out, then you want to know, like, if a company hires an employee, they want to make sure that it's a good employee. Well,
Yes.
if you're going to hire out somebody to source deals, you better make sure that the person sourcing your deals knows what they're doing.
Yeah, there is no like
Um,
Zillow, there is like no Zillow for wholesalers, right? Like for realtors, it's easy when I'm looking to refer someone. First thing I look at usually is their Zillow profile, right? If they have one, or if they do, how many deals they close, what are their reviews? So I look for that on the public websites, and unfortunately, there is no database like that public facing for wholesalers. So we have to do a little bit of extra work to screen them,
yep,
right? And most investors don't take
exactly.
the time to do it.
Yep. Randy kind of touched on this a little bit before, but if a wholesaler can understand ARVs and rehabs, they're usually good. What I have noticed is most people that do wholesaling don't purposely mislead people. They're doing wholesaling, they really want to get into it, they've got the appetite to do it, they've got the hunger to find deals. They just don't know what they're doing. So they will bring deals to you and they'll say, hey, is this a deal? And you're like, not even close. So typically what we'll do there is we'll work with them on the numbers. So we'll say, hey, this is where we come with our ARV, this is where we come up with our rehabs. If they continue to repeat not picking that up, then it's just something that's probably a lost cause. If you go over it with them 3 or 4 different times and they're just not getting it, it's just best to cut ties and move on. But that's where I see one of the biggest mistakes with wholesalers. If you don't understand the numbers, then you can't wholesale. That's what it is. I also like to see if they're direct to seller. This is something that I didn't worry about as much in Cincinnati. I didn't have this problem as often. Now that I'm down here in Tampa, I have this all the time. Every deal is daisy chained like 15 different times. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone down the rabbit hole of a wholesale down here, and there's literally 7 wholesalers involved. And you're just like, what in the world are you doing? Like, and it'll be like under contract originally like 150, and now the price being chopped is like 225 because people just keep adding on 5 or 10,000. I have purchased deals that have been daisy chained like once. So like the wholesaler had a wholesaler that wholesaled it to us. I don't care. They both got paid. That's fine. It is what it is. It's a little weird, but hey, if you're connecting it, it's fine. but see if they're sourcing their deals direct to seller. The other thing down here that I do love, a lot of wholesalers will tie up properties on the MLS. So they will go to a property that's listed on the MLS and they will offer, let's say it's listed at 300, they'll offer 250 and the seller will accept it. And the contract will say close in 10 days, cash, it's assignable and stuff like that, which is normal for our contracts down here. And then the wholesaler will start to shop it around and find out, wait, nobody's going to pay more than 210 for this. And they circle back around and go to the seller and go, hey, sorry, I know I told you 250, we'd close in 10 days. I've already got your property off the market for this, but we need to come down to 210. They'll usually come at it with inspection reasons or some other false pretense. That is the worst. When you associate yourself with bad wholesalers, sellers start to associate you as the person that's also the problem. They don't know the difference, especially because a lot of wholesalers will say, this is my partner, or this is our construction. Like a lot of our wholesalers will say, hey, you're going in and you're saying you're the GC to get a rehab scope for the property on an inspection. But they'll say that you work with them. So you will start to get a bad rap really quickly, and it does not go well. That's why this is so important.
As realtors, if you're getting calls from wholesalers, usually they won't come out of the gate and just say, hey, I'm looking to, lock this property up and wholesale, right? They will just, because they technically don't have to, right? Tell you, if they lock up the deal, it's up to them, right? If it's legal and it's allowed, the contract allows them to wholesale, they can wholesale. So the common way they would, entice you is like, hey, would you represent me on this property, right? And you get excited as the realtor, right, working with that wholesaler now, and you lock it up, and that even further gets you closer to the sellers having a bad feeling in terms of about you if that doesn't work out, because now you convinced your seller to put this deal together because now you're representing both the seller and the buyer, right? And hence, of course, you can say like, look, I wasn't, I didn't know who they were, and it happens, like not every, buyer pulls through, but it still could leave a bad taste in your client's mouth, right? So vetting them as realtors is just as important, right? On your own listings that you might have that need a lot of work. And I'll give you a quick example. There was a listing that this one realtor listed that needed quite a bit of work. And my client, who was a buyer, traditional buyer, not an investor, this was a traditional buyer. He wanted to get something that was mortgageable, that needed work so he could get a bit, a good deal. But he was an end user and buyer. So I told him, like, look, if you're comfortable with doing work, then you should be able to come, win over some properties, because a lot of the times the investor offers a lot less than what you would pay. Granted, you're a conventional with a loan buyer, so that's a disadvantage. But if you come in high enough and the spread is big enough between the cash offer they have on the table and what we're going to offer, it could convince the seller to go in your direction. Well, in this particular situation, it happened. There was an investor. Are you sharing your screen, Eric, or no? Oh, something is happening. I don't know. Anyway, in this particular
situation, it's not me.
Oh, got it. I don't know what that was. Someone is trying to like hijack our Zoom.
Right? I have no clue.
So in this particular situation, the listing agent ended up taking an offer from an investor, and we knew this realtor, right? Actually. So I was like, okay, that's fair, and I was like, look, can you just, if you don't mind, like, I just want to let you know, I work with a lot of investors. I was like, if this offer is high, which it sounds like it's high because we came in on a really good number, and I don't understand how the numbers will make sense for a flipper with what you're saying. I was like, there's a lot of investors out there that lock up deals at a high number that makes absolutely no sense, and then they ask for credits, kind of like what you just mentioned, Eric, where they come back and ask for a lower number. I was like, so just be aware of that. And she actually was very open with us, and she told me who it was. And I'm not going to name names, right? out of respect, whatever. I should, but I'm not. But I was like, well, this particular company actually is known for this. And I knew them. I was like, so they are actually the perfect one for what I'm telling you. I was like, I hope it works out, right? I also hope that my client can get the house. If it doesn't, I was like, but just be aware what could happen, right? They're probably going to come back and ask for a lower number because the number you guys locked this up at just makes no sense. I don't know what rehabber is going to make any money here. She's like, all right, well, we'll see. Sure enough, she's texting us early into the escrow. She's like, they still haven't sent their deposit, Randy. So I'm just keeping you in the loop. I'm like, all right. So she finally got the deposit a couple days late. And then a few days later, Randy, sure enough, they're asking for a huge credit, right? And they made up some story. And then guess what she did? They denied it. They canceled escrow. And guess who they opened escrow with? My client, right? And now, do you think that wholesaler has a bad name with that realtor? Anytime she'll see that company, she will not even consider showing that offer to their clients. And she's going to go and tell her other realtor friends about this company. And that's how it spreads. Now you're on the blacklist that fast by doing it once, right? And imagine that company does it second time and a third time, which I know they do. Like now they're completely blacklisted in San Diego County. Like no one wants to work with them. That's how it happens, right? But anyway, so it was interesting educating a realtor about what could happen. And then it actually happened. She gained trust with me even more. And she's like, all right, we're not going to mess with this. Let's go, guys. We'll go with your client. Our seller actually loves this family. Yeah, they're going to wait 30 days, but you know what? You guys are serious, right? So anyway, just wanted to share that because it literally happened with one of my clients.
Yeah, no, and it happens all the time. Like sadly, there's a lot of wholesalers that don't realize it's like a long game, and they'll do whatever they can to try and lock up deals. And sadly, we see it often. And there's even big companies down here that do that. So there's big companies down here that will they'll lock up deals consistently, and they're big enough that they typically just don't care. And they do a lot of times on the MLS. So those deals I ran for a while on the spreadsheet, I'll go back through it. They're locked up with them because I'll get the properties that I run in my spreadsheet we talked about way back in the past. I'll get those sent my email and I'm like, I ran that property, and I'll check and they have it locked up for 20,000 less, and the numbers still don't make sense. I'm like, okay, well, it'll sit forever.
I think we could share that. So yes, what I found, it's the big national companies that tend to do it because they're volume based. They're just submitting a ton of offers every single day. So from my experience, I found that the big national wholesalers tend to be the ones, unfortunately, that come in high and then ask for credit. I'm not going to tell you which ones. You could do your own research. I just don't want, I don't want them reaching out to us that we're bad mouthing them because, I'm sure they lock up some deals that make sense, right? It's just a numbers game. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, and so I have three examples to kind of tie this with, which Randy, you went through one that I think is really good. But so the importance of vetting a wholesaler is a lot of times your reputation falls on the line. A lot of times, if you don't do it correctly, my first example I'm going to use, it can really kill just a lot. So, and I'll kind of explain that. But so the first one I'm going to talk about, when I first got down to Florida, I met with an investor. He had done a couple flips, not a ton, but he was looking to get more into the game. So I was letting him know, like, hey, we'll help you find properties. We see this as long term. We'll do what we can to help you out. I won't use his name or anything. And he was just like, I appreciate it. So I kept in touch, normal stuff, and slowly started losing contact with him. He didn't answer as much. So I just moved on. I get a lot of investors that are gung ho about investing, and then they will slowly start to fade off. So I was like, okay, he is what he is. So he texted me like a couple weeks ago, and he goes, take a look at this property. And it's already listed. And he's like, can you run comps on it? So I pull it up and I'm like, this house has been flipped. Immediately like went off in my head. I'm like, he flipped this. So, and it had been on for like 70 days. So it's listed at 450. and I run comps. And I'm like, well, this is like a 370 ARV. So, and I feel pretty strong about the ARV. So I texted him over. I said 370, 380, probably not much higher. And he's like, that's what I thought. He's like, I bought it from a local wholesaler. They were preaching that the ARV was 470 plus. Big company, not going to say the name. So he purchased it, didn't do the due diligence that he should have. And he felt like the comps were around 400 now that he had looked at it after the fact. So he did not do his due diligence. He trusted this local company. He thought it's a really big company. There's no way they'd screw me over. It gets worse. So they also had their GC do a rehab budget. Well, their GC estimated the flip to be about 60,000 and ended up being 90,000. So this local investor who reached out to me, he's telling me everything that's going on with the deal. He bought it for 330. He was all in at 420, and it's worth, I think, 370, 380. The highest offer he had received was 390. So his best case scenario right now is losing 30 grand. And I told him at our meeting when we originally met, I said, you send me any house, even if I'm not the realtor involved with that, I'll run comps for you. It takes me 10 minutes. It doesn't bother me. And I've done that for people and have gotten listings from it, or just builds up the relationship and trust. I'm like, but I don't want you to make a mistake. So now he also has other stuff that he has to, it put him in a bind, and he's got some other stuff that he's got to get done. But so that's a large company that he didn't do due diligence on. So even if you're vetting your wholesaler, I would vet every deal. Even if you trust a wholesaler with everything in you and you've worked with them a ton, I would vet every deal, because you never know what you're going to miss. And it is super easy to start to trust somebody or trust a large company and say, well, they wouldn't lie to me about numbers. And then you get into it and they're all off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing, step one, vet the wholesaler, right? Step two, vet the actual property by doing your own due diligence. Like we've talked about in previous trainings, right? Doing the CMA yourself, looking at the comps maybe that they sent you, if they did send you any, right? Double checking all of it, right? Googling the property, a simple Google search that investors forget to do. And I had one investor buy a property and then later found out that someone died inside the home, right? Like,
oh, no. Yeah.
And now I have to go and sell it, right? Like that's not an easy sale. So just doing your own due diligence and having a system for it, right? Which this is not what the training is about today, but you gotta do it, right? Vet the investor, the wholesaler, vet the property. If you can't find anything about them online, one idea or tip, go to the Facebook groups that we talked about in the past, right? So go to your local Facebook groups or even the national ones, whichever that you're part of, but it's better if you go to the local ones and ask, hey, by the way, here's a company that's looking to wholesale a deal to me. Anyone has any feedback on them, right? People will share their feedback, right? So leverage the community of investors, realtors that are probably also in that group, right? If they work with investors, right? They will tell you, right? That's the fastest way to get quick feedback from the people in your community, right? And it could make it could literally make your vetting process like last 30 seconds, right? You'll post there, you'll probably have, if that person has a negative reputation, you'll probably have 30 posts on it within a minute, right? And then you'll be like, all right, that's all I needed to see. Moving on, right? Instead of you looking at the deal, vetting the deal, only to then vet the wholesaler, like doing it backwards, right? So yeah, just a little tip for you. But I know you got another case.
I love that. Yeah, no. And I think like Facebook groups, I think we've said it a million times on here. Plugging into Facebook groups are gold on the investor side. Like you'll find out so much. The second one, it's less of like, they don't really harm anybody, but this is like what a bad wholesaler can look like. So when we first moved down to Florida, we had a wholesaler reach out to us. He sent us a townhome. And he was like, hey, are you interested in buying this as a rental? Because I was on a bunch of lists and I was like, yeah, like I'll go take a look at it. So he sent us out to the property. And the first time he didn't go with us. So we went, I met the owner, had conversation. And the guy seemed really nice. And he was just like, hey, like, I need to sell this. My daughter is in the Air Force. She's moving. We want to move with her. This is a second, like this was our first home. We just bought a second one. Like we're just ready to move on. So I told him, I said, hey, look, I won't say his name, but name of wholesaler. He is our contact. I don't want to step on any toes, so I'll get back with him and I'll let you know. So called wholesaler and I said, numbers are really tight, man, like really tight. I think he was shopping it for like 230, and I was like, I can't do that. I will reach out to some of my investors and see what number I can get back to you. And one of them was like, hey, I'll buy it for 210. So I went back to wholesaler and I said, we could be at 210. So he's like, all right, let's go out to the property one more time and we'll talk to the owner. So we go back out, we look at it. I get photos from my investors so that I'm vetting the deal for them. I'm boots on the ground. They're like, just let me know what you see and what it's looking like. We get to the end of the thing, talked to the owner, found everything out about him. Super nice guy. My dad was stationed the same Air Force base his daughter was stationed, so we had kind of a connection, both Bucks fans. I leave that, and wholesaler calls me, and he's like, I'm so sick of this seller. He's a psychopath. Like, he's a loose cannon. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I just talked to the guy like twice now, and the last time I talked to him for an hour. And I'm like, that's so weird. He's like, here's the seller's number. I'm done dealing with him. He could. So I called the seller and I'm like, what is going on? And so I found out through the seller that the wholesaler was completely off on everything. I originally started at like 280 as a number and just kept beating him down. Kept trying to tie up the property and had random people walking the property that he had no clue who they were. Then the wholesaler tried a couple like shady things to get the deal to close through some creative financing, different ways. And the dude told me, he was like, look, I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. If it goes through him, I will not sell this. He's like, I never want to hear that person's name again. He's like, he is scum. And I was like, oh, that's like strong. So anyway, go through a couple days, and I called the guy back. I'm like, look, this is the number that my investor has to be at. The wholesaler you were talking to gave me the free pass. I won't take a dime. I just want to help you get it sold because of what's going on in your situation. My investor's got to be at this. Let's make it happen. So ended up closing in 7 days. The seller was so scarred. He called me every day and was like, is this going to blow up? Like, what's going on? Are we going to close? What's title look like? And I'm like, dude, I promise you, like, I'm like, it will 100% go through. We're fine. Everything's good. So we closed it. That same wholesaler did that multiple other times on other deals that he sent me. Like, ended up just like the craziest stuff I've ever seen. And then he had a deal that I was shopping that I sent to him. I said, do you have anybody that's interested? It's a little bit south for my liking, but you said this was your area. Oh, absolutely. It was an elderly couple that I was helping move out of their home. I was taking no fee on it or anything. He's like, I'll be out there at 12, like just rock solid. I've got somebody. That's perfect area. 20 minutes before he's supposed to show up, this elderly couple gets their cats out of the house. They get it all nice and neat. He calls me and goes, yeah, that deal's not worth it, and just hangs up. That's the last I've ever heard of him. I blocked his number after that, and we ended up accepting an offer like 15K over what he was going to offer. But everybody he's talked to, even the title dude that was working it, the title dude works with a ton of investors. He's like, I'll never work with that guy again. He's like, he is just a terrible human being. And I was like, yep, didn't take too long to figure that out. So that was my second example. And it didn't, like, the seller knew, I made it known that I wasn't connected with the wholesaler when I was there. Like, I just randomly met this guy, like, we'll see how this goes. But I wanted my name, nothing on it. So that's kind of how it could go poorly, though, because if he would have told the seller I was associated with him, me and my company are now associated with this guy who has no clue what he's doing. So I think that's a good example, kind of takeaway. And then I have one more if we have time. Let me see.
Yeah, we got time.
We got a couple more. Okay. Third one's an Ohio one, really large company, our local large wholesaling company, was on their buyers list. Their disposition team would reach out to every agent and investor in the world. You would end up on like 8 different buyer lists, but it was all for the same company. So you'd get the same deal 8 times. Very frustrating. They would send us deals. None of them would ever pencil out, ever. They sent us one very much in an area that we liked, an area we knew really well. We went out to it, and walked it, gave them the offer that we could give. And they were like, I mean, the person that I talked to cussed me out. Just like, how dare you offer that? It was like, 15,000 less than what they were shopping at. He's like, that's just embarrassing. I'm like, hey, look, we just send out an offer because you never know. And I'm like, that's where we're at. That's the top. And he's like, you're a joke. He's like, we'll flip this and make double what you guys would ever make on it. You just have no clue what you're doing. Later to find out, he flipped the property, listed it, sat for 6 months, sold it for, I think, like 15,000 more than we offered. So his original price that he was shopping at, and I know they put about 70,000 into it, and that company's defunct. So they're no longer in Cincinnati.
So you had to hold on to it and then rehab it.
Yeah, and they did it with a ton of them, and they ended up. They were a company that I know was putting about 120,000 into marketing, and they had the systems. They just, none of their acquisition guys knew what numbers were. So they would lock these deals up, and it was like, you're not even in the ballpark. And they would just, I mean, they were super like prideful. So they would just, oh, you have no clue what you're talking about. This was back in like 2022. Market was still kind of hot. And they held on a bunch of properties, tried to flip them, and fell out. But they had the worst reputation with every investor. Nobody shot their deals.
One red flag, there's probably several, but one red flag, like, you know, if a wholesaler is doing a lot of direct mail and dealing with sellers a lot, that's where you see a lot of them, you know, trying to take advantage of things there.
Yeah.
And one thing that I would see is that they would like put really, really low deposits, right? Like $500 or $1,000.
Yeah.
That's a easy sign to know like they're probably just wholesaling it, which is again not a bad thing. It tells me a little bit about them in terms of like, okay, are they serious? Are they just pumping volume? Especially if I see a like $1,000 deposit on, you know, a $500,000 or $600,000 purchase price, right, in San Diego, like that's very low.
Yeah.
Maybe $1,000 in Indianapolis, right, for a $70,000 purchase or 80, maybe that can make sense, right? But in San Diego for $600,000 purchase, that's very low, right? So if I see that, that's like, okay, I just put a mark by it, right? Like, okay, that. But then if you start looking at the purchase price, like we talked about earlier, and the price seems really high. So if I work the numbers backwards from the ARV, the estimated repairs that they sometimes provide, some don't even provide any numbers, but some will, right?
Yeah.
And you start working backwards and you're like, how did they get this number, right? So when I see that low deposit, right, and high purchase price, to me, those are usually automatic red flags that just tells me I need to dig in deeper and figure this out. And I had this happen to another client that I was gonna actually list their property, and they told me that some cash investor, because they put in their information somewhere online, and a cash investor called them and submitted an offer, cash quick, and they got excited. I was like, can you please send me that offer? Like, let me just review it, right? Because I was working on getting that property listed for them, and it didn't need work. And I was like, look, I'll review it. Like, I'm not going to charge you. Let me just review it and vet it for you, because I know how these investors work. That's my community. Like, I know these people. And sure enough, those are the things I quickly picked up. I was like, very low deposit, very high price. And I was like, do I have your permission, seller, if I can reach out and call this investor and vet them for you? And they did. And when I got on the phone with them, I quickly, you know, they realized they're now dealing with someone that actually knows what they're doing, and they backed away. They were like, oh, we sent our offer. We don't want to offer anymore. I'm like, so then my client, guess what happened? Like my trust with my client, or my future client at that point, I was hoping to be a client, the trust just went through the roof, because I was telling him, I was like, look, there's a lot of bad investors out there. I was like, let me just help you vet them. And sure enough, this was one of them. And then guess what? I listed that property for them. They were so thankful, because they would have wasted 30 days, whatever, you know, get tied up in a deal, and then, you know, only to get beat up, right? So anyway, it's not hard to spot them if you know what you're looking for, right? And usually those are like kind of little things I look for, like very low deposits, very high price. Those are like telling signs of like, something smells here.
And I think it's like, there's the buyers beware. Like, Ohio is a buyer beware state. So if the buyer's buying a property, anything that you can see with your eyes, it's at that point your problem if you purchase a home that's that way. But I almost think it's the same with wholesalers. Like it's buyer beware on the investor side. Like you kind of are responsible for the decision you make. And I think wholesalers get a bad rap. There's a ton of really good wholesalers out there. There really is, but it's buyers beware. So if you're going to purchase a property, you should be, it's just as much on you to do your due diligence as anybody else. And that was kind of how this came up when me and Randy were talking, was the investor that on the first story, I feel terrible for, but I'm like, dude, you've invested in stuff before. Like, you know that you don't just rely on somebody and their numbers. But there was some stuff that made it that way, but it's buyers beware every single time. So who you work with is buyers beware. The properties you purchase is buyers beware, and you should be doing your homework. Like, it's something that's really important, and it doesn't take, real estate is high risk, high reward. So one deal can really upend a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, I want to leave it on a positive note. Is yes, there's a lot of good wholesalers, and they're making good money, and they present good opportunities to rehabbers. So there's a space for them in the industry, right? Hence, I bought my first one from one, right, and many others from wholesalers, and we've wholesaled many when I was running the investment firm. So like, I don't want the takeaway from this to be like, oh, all wholesalers are bad. That's not what we're trying to say. Because there are a lot of good ones. As long as you know how to vet them. It's the same with realtors, right? There's the good realtors, there's the bad ones. It's any industry. Pick any industry out there. You're always going to have the bad apples, right? It's up to us, the public, to be able to understand, how do I vet? How do I vet these people? How do I vet realtors? How do I vet investors? In a lot of industries, that's become really easy because of a lot of online platforms that have come out that have a lot of the ratings, right? Like we talked about with realtors, but with contractors on Angie List and things of that nature, right? But with wholesalers and or investors, there is no database, right? So it really does fall, a lot of the heavy lifting is on us, the consumer, right? Or in our, if you're a realtor working with investors or rehabbers, you should be contributing to the vetting, right? Don't just lean on the investor, your client, to do all the vetting. Like, help out, vet them with the investor if they're looking to buy rehabs using you, right? So but yeah, there's a lot of money to be made if you're dealing with the right ones. So we'll end on that. We're at the top of the hour, and we'll see you guys next month. Thanks again. Hopefully you got some tips from this, and don't get caught with one of these guys. See ya.
Right. See you guys.